Welcome. I'm Sondra Kiss, Managing Partner for Kissinger Group. Thanks for joining us today as we tackle a challenge that's hitting so many leaders right now, and that is the rise of change fatigue. Nearly half of employees say they're overwhelmed at work. That's not just tired, that's not just busy, that's overwhelmed. And as big changes pile on, employees are becoming exhausted. Good leaders know that change fatigue erodes trust, energy, and focus. And so they're developing techniques to spot it early on and to address it head on. So today we're going to lean into a couple of experts to share some ideas and methods that help identify change fatigue, streamline the activities, set realistic expectations, and address burnout. So let me introduce our guests, starting with Christine. Christine Wenger is Director of HR Communications for Toyota. Her career began in technical consulting and software development, and she now enables Toyota teams to prepare for and thrive through large organizational changes. After a chance personal experience in learning about how the brain handles pain, she started to become curious about the neuroscience behind mindfulness and everyday mental fitness. So in 2019, Christine co founded the Mindfulness at Toyota program that is focused on building resilience, creativity, personal productivity, and well being for all Toyota team members. And she'll be bringing us some of that wisdom today. Meanwhile, Ogbe Airiodion will bring us a technical framework from a change practitioner's perspective. Ogbe is a senior change management consultant, and he specializes in large-scale, complex, and challenging types of business transformations. He's worked for large Fortune 500 companies, including companies like Apple, Intel, and SoCalGas. 2 years ago, Ogbe launched OCM Solution, which is a website that helps coach and support the change management community with content on best change practices. The site receives over 15,000 unique visits each month from change practitioners and business leaders. Ogbe is a former U.S. Marine who started his change management career working with large Wall Street investment banks at the height of the financial crisis. So he's been around the block. We'll talk to Ogbe and Christine about what they've seen and done to make transformation manageable. So if you're joining us today, you probably already understand that for leaders driving organizational transformation, the biggest challenge isn't just executing change, it's ensuring that your teams don't burn out when too much change happens. Ogbe, this is a movie that you've seen a few times before in your career at many different companies. Can you start off by talking about what it looks like and how it impacts organizations?
Yes, Sondra, most definitely. Normally, I say we have to first define what change fatigue really is. Let's start with that. Change fatigue is a state of physical, mental, and emotional overload that is often caused by one, continuous, never-ending changes, as well as two, overwhelming organizational change that is happening all at once at the same time. Really, change fatigue happens when employees are either experiencing too many changes after the other or simultaneously.
And what happens when you see change fatigue? What's the impact?
Oh, wow, that's a really good one. The overall impact that I've seen time and time again when organizations are experiencing change fatigue is that it leads to a couple of things. One, it leads to employee disengagement. It leads to resistance and people getting burnt out and also decreased productivity.
Mm. And it seems like I'm reading more, hearing more about this recently. Why do you suppose it's getting so much attention right now?
There's actually a lot of reasons for that, and that includes currently a lot of digitalization, large-scale business changes, as well as AI-driven transformations they really have
Yep.
been picking up pace. And so, understanding change fatigue and how to mitigate this really matters a lot and is becoming very critical because many companies are in a place where they are really managing 20, 30, even 50 or more initiatives all at the same time, overwhelming employees.
Sondra, it's interesting. I want to piggyback off of what Obi said. There's a lot happening in our world and in our companies today. So think political climate, there's layoffs, there's the economy conversations, there's a lot of transformations, as he was talking about. And that contributes to this constant change and really uncertainty. The thing is, it's hard for our brains to actually handle that. So change is really hard. 40 to even 95% of our days are actually driven by habit. So change is this energy that consumes much of what's going on in our brains. It's that rational brain that we're trying to touch into, and you want to engage it. But down here in our lower brains, that's that autopilot, that habit driven. And that is actually what a lot of our day entails. So it takes a long time to get these bigger shifts, these larger. And our brains are what I like to refer to as a prediction machine, which make uncertainty hard, right? And change brings that uncertainty. Our brain, the analogy I'd use is our brain works a lot like the autocomplete function on our iPhones, right? So it's constantly trying to guess the next word. When we're constantly listening for, maybe you're listening to an audiobook, your brain is trying to guess what that is. When you're talking and having a conversation, you're jumping ahead to whatever that person's taking or speaking about. So when we don't know what will happen next, our brains use a lot of energy. They're ruminating, they're trying to figure out that answer, and that can really diminish our capacity to do other things.
Yeah.
And so because of our brains like struggle to adapt, it's not surprising that actually 70% of organizational change efforts fail. And the primary reasons of that failure is lack of management support or even employee buy-in, right? So it comes at us in both directions. And when change initiatives are introduced, like we're going to talk about a little bit today, only 15% are those what we call early adopters, and they embrace that change immediately. But there's about 60% that sit in this uncertain, and another 25 that kind of sit in this really heavy resistant to change. That pocket area that's probably the most resistant is mid-level managers. They're getting the squeeze from the top, and they're trying to lead teams in that. So that's a lot of what we're seeing.
Yeah, frozen middle. I've heard that before. Christine, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about how you see, especially with all this neuroscience that you've learned about, how do people typically respond to all of this?
So we think the solution is to find stability and kind of eliminate those sources of uncertainty. So we end up playing, do you remember? I'm going to date myself. We were playing whack-a-mole, right? So with different changes and stressors that pop up, thinking that's going to help us through. There's some moment of truth to that, but change is always happening, whether we like it or not. And coping with that is really this inside job. So have you ever said, when this is over, it's going to calm down? Or when we get to here, we're going to go back to normal. Here's the deal. Changes, big and small, are constant in work and in life. So you get these major reorganizations at work. You get someone leaving a team. Maybe you go to your favorite coffee shop and they happen to be out of a product that you like. So change is actually happening to us all the time. We don't need to play whack-a-mole, although I can say I've had one of those in my office at one point in time. It can be fun and help relieve the stress, but we need to really look at building our resilience muscles so that we can ride these waves of change. There's some research out there from early 2021, 22, where it says resilient teams are 3.6 times more likely to meet financial targets, 3.9 times more likely to satisfy and retain customers. So I talk about building your change muscle helps
Mhm.
put you in a spot to reach your company goals.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think resilience is another term we're hearing a lot about right now. And it's a really important strategy. Just to back up for a minute, we've got to understand when our organization is at a tipping point of when it's too much. And that means maybe zooming out and looking at it at an organizational level. And this is something, Obi, I know you've done, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about some of that work here.
Sure, most definitely. So the best practice really is to apply a multi-step approach. The
Mhm.
first step to addressing change saturation is really to first understand the level of change saturation that is impacting the organization. And this involves conducting a change saturation assessment. As part of your change assessment, you will want to identify all of the different projects, programs, initiatives, and really any other change efforts that is in flight or that is planned for the next 12 months. And then you have to identify the personas. And this is when people normally say, what do you mean by personas? Personas involves grouping people together based on commonalities. For example, a persona could be an executive, a director. Okay?
So then what do you
Okay.
do?
Good question. So after identifying the personas, you then need to assess how each persona is being impacted by each change effort. And as we just discussed, it is important to use personas because it gives you a more holistic view of how groups of people have been impacted. And so next, you will want to determine how many hours on average each employee within each persona will need to take off their regular day-to-day job function to adopt the changes over the next 12 months. If, for example, individuals need to spend between 0 hours to less than 25 hours in total to adopt changes across all of these projects over the next 12 months, then we say that particular persona is said to be experiencing a low saturation risk level. So anything really over 75 hours in total over the next 12 months is considered very high change saturation, which we say is unsustainable change saturation.
So Obi, what you just described sounds like a lot of really helpful data. It also sounds like a lot of work for somebody to do all that estimating and across the different personas. Do organizations really go through all of
Oh,
this?
yes, most definitely. A lot of the ways in which they do it is ensuring that they can get a change management consultant or resource, and that could be an internal resource who has a lot of experience doing this. Now, a lot of these organizations understand one key thing, which is to increase their ROI on these changes, they need to be able to do this. And which is why I am saying a lot more organizations are doing this more and more.
Yeah. No, that's great to know. And then I would also wonder for organizations that just don't have the appetite or the resources to do the assessment, you still need some sort of indicator as to, hey, we're in trouble. My team is nearing burnout. And I'd love to get some thoughts on what that looks like. Christine, maybe you can jump in and share some of those signs.
Sure. I think you asked the question just a minute ago, Sondra, around do organizations really do this? And Obi's been in lots of different organizations, I myself. And what I've seen is you can go full where you are assessing all of the projects across. And I've also seen it and been part of where we do it in a maybe 2 or 3 initiatives at one time. So I might not be tackling 20 or 30, but I might be looking at it of just 2 or 3 or a small number in one particular department that happens to be affecting others.
Right.
So you can
Great
start
point.
small and look at that. But you asked a little bit about like what are other ways that we can see this and our teams are nearing burnout, right? So when you're talking about the teams that are doing the work or and trying to deliver to your customers and your dealers and in whatever industry you're in, I've seen this in a few ways. So teams might feel like they're in constant firefighting mode. So truly the analogy of burnout, right?
Mhm.
And you're unable to just really keep up. There might be some obvious signs. So work quality goes down or even quantity of output goes down, short reaction times with people, and you might
Mhm.
see some more taking sick days, right? So those are something as a leader you might be able to see. But there's also the less obvious signs. I hear it all the time where people feel like they can't take time off. So they're not doing that. Maybe they're
Mhm.
not sleeping well, but they're not necessarily sharing that out loud. A lack of engaging with others. Maybe you're on video calls and this person typically would be contributing or on camera and engaging, and you notice a shift
Hmm.
in how they're showing up for work. Maybe they're also unable to make decisions regardless as to the size of the decision.
Hmm.
It's like this overwhelmed state. And so some of those become less obvious. And in those cases, I switch to putting people where I'll buddy them up. I focus in on just narrowing in on the necessary work. If needed, encourage time off. The work will always be there. We'll get it done. But the well-being of the team and the team members are more important.
That's fantastic. And let's assume that we've determined that we have an issue. And Christine, you've already touched on some solution. Obi, I'd love to get your thoughts on some of the things that you've seen work nicely.
Most definitely. I love solutions. So let me give you 2 strategies. One of the strategies to mitigating change fatigue really involves setting realistic expectations. Why is that important? Because it ensures employees are not overwhelmed by unrealistic timelines or shifting priorities or inadequate resources, which is really something that affects a lot of organizations. So setting realistic, clear expectations is really critical to managing this situation. The second one really is conduct impact assessments. Why is this important? It is important because it helps leaders gauge the true workload employees are managing, helping the leaders to really identify potential bottlenecks or capacity constraints. A lot of times, organizations might not be doing this change impact assessment, and so they lose sight of how to manage these types of saturation situations. So those are 2 really good strategies that have helped a lot of organizations in managing this level of overwhelmness.
Yes, really helpful. And I'm sure, that this concept of realistic expectations is music to the ears of many people. And there are also situations where the work still has to get done. You can't really subtract work. And Christine, I've been working with Toyota for many years now, and I've watched this and this recognition that there's a balance between We're going to set realistic expectations. And we're also going to acknowledge that massive change is part of the business environment. I'd love your thoughts on how leaders can really support their teams through this reality.
I think part of what we talk about is work has to get done. And it's not, sometimes that feels challenging to do. We often talk about what can stop in order to start something else or change something else. So we use a lot of language around stop, start, continue, and that using that to help set some expectations, but also for our leaders and really how can they support teams through this and just still deliver on the work. I focus in on helping leaders think about how to build resilience within teams, also within their current routines and what they're doing. So acknowledging this shared journey is beneficial. Remember that you as a leader are also going through all these changes just like your team is, and each person's at a different place. Other things is I talk about discussing and encouraging planning breaks. So asking questions, what do you do for break? What do you do to rejuvenate, whether it's during the day, whether it's on a weekend? And then you can model taking a break. I'm not talking it has to be long. Sometimes it's even 5 minutes, but we often try and cut meetings off at 25 minutes or 50 minutes to make sure there's time for them to break. Now, we're not perfect at it by any means, but try and do that. Another way to do it is building reflection into routines by traveling in time. So, what went well this week? It helps build the muscle in team meetings to see progress and help build that predictability that we can get through things. You can take them to go back in time and say, remember the last time we had a change like this? What did we do? We made it through. These are the things that helped us. Or you can ask your team to go forward in time and say, imagine if this all works out in a week, a month from now, what will things look like? Right. So traveling through time helps to lay the foundation for when changes come our way. We don't always get that warning. So you're building that muscle separate from sometimes that actual change.
Yeah, the time travel idea is fantastic, and I know other companies use that as well. Amazon has a concept that they use that's for a different reason. It's for innovation, but the idea is to have people travel ahead of time and then to work backwards to how they got there, and it's really effective in engaging people in the process, I think, and getting out of the present frustration. Christine, I'd love for you to touch on the concept of nemawashi because that's something that I learned working with Toyota, and I think it's just a great change management concept. Can you talk briefly about that?
Yeah. And I think this is also building upon the Amazon press release example. It's a form of nemawashi. So nemawashi means going around the roots or laying the groundwork. It's often used for us around consensus building, right? Getting feedback, gathering support. But when we use it for changes, it can be focused on getting a small group buy in and then you expand it to be larger. So you might start in one department and expand to others. You might start with leaders or very senior leaders and go to your kind of mid-level management and then work out. The possibilities are endless, but it's around getting consensus or building support, small group, and then expanding.
What techniques do the two of you recommend to engage employees in the communication process? I know, for example, a lot of organizations use change champions.
Yes, indeed. And to implement and roll out a change champion network, we normally recommend leaders to engage with departmental managers and leaders to identify trusted employees that can help reinforce change messages. One key critical component of having a change champion network is that during a time of change, employees look to their leaders for direction, but then look to their colleagues, the champions for help, or when they are running into issues, which is why having a change champion network is very recommended.
Yeah, and Obi, I've done this in various kind of roundtable forums. So think a targeted audience or designated representatives, a change listener network, for example.
Sure.
These groups can be used as sensing team to get feedback on how messages are landing or previewing them before you're sending out to everyone. Therefore, you can get some feedback and make some refinements. You can also use the groups to talk in depth about the changes, about what isn't changing, how to reinforce messaging and gain additional champions that allow you really to expand upon your reach and magnify that messaging that you're trying to get out.
Oh, that's excellent. What else can leaders do to recognize and get that employee perspective as they're moving through this?
So I think it's important to really recognize efforts along the path to full change. Some of these changes are years long. And so you've got to find ways you can span this from doing recognition in team meetings. You can use some of the built in technology using praise in Microsoft Teams, success stories to highlight those early adopters and do video clips and put those up on boards, or asking employees, even in team meetings, share how you did that. And you're learning what they did. And perhaps that actually is shared with other team members and they start to get ideas for their own change.
Yes, and
Fantastic.
yes, indeed. And to quickly add to what Christine just said, the four things I want to quickly outline. One is show empathy.
Mm.
Acknowledging change fatigue in your leadership messaging and during all hands really goes a long way. Two, implementing recognition programs that can be as simple as sending a communication that recognizes employees who have gone above and beyond. Three, recognition can also involve sharing success stories. I think we mentioned success stories earlier, including what really worked and what didn't. Lastly, don't shy away from calling out what didn't work because transparency is very important as it enables people to see what others are doing and have struggled with. However, talking about what didn't work, it is also important to talk about what solutions were implemented to right that ship.
Obi, we're human, right? Sometimes things go well, sometimes things don't. We've got to learn and adjust in order to adapt to those changes. I love it.
I'd like to thank Christine and Obi for their time today and excellent insight. This was so interesting, and you've really helped everybody learn a lot about how to manage this. And we really appreciate it.